Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So we started Siman Tesvav in Iggeres HaKodesh, and we're on page Kuf Chaf Aleph, which is opposite of page 240. And last week we said that this Siman in Iggeres HaKodesh is going to be devoted primarily. The bulk of it is going to be analyzing and examining the spheres, primarily the Midas, the seven Midas of Hashem, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yisod, and Malchus. Also some attention paid to Chabad, Chachma, Bina, and Das. But before the Alter Rebbe gets to the meat, the body of the Iggeres, of the cement, first thing the Alter Rebbe does is he's giving us an introduction. So that's to say, to contextualize everything that we're going to learn. And the first thing the Alter Rebbe says in his introduction is that we should understand that the reason why we're able to have some sort of Havana Vahasaga, some sort of understanding in the spheres above, is because we have a neshama. The neshama is blown into us, and as we explained last week, it is blown into us from the deepest part of Hashem, and therefore we are chilek alikam b'mal mamish. We can look at ourselves, and we are in a way we are a reflection of Hashem. We contain the DNA of Hashem, kaviyachol. And that's why the pasuk says, "B'bsari echza alika." From my own flesh, I can see Hashem. I can perceive Hashem. I can understand Hashem. And that's an incredible teva. It's incredible kindness that Hashem did to us. Because the only way that we can understand something or appreciate something is if we have some sort of concept of it on our own, something which is completely removed from our experience. We have no way of relating to it. You know, an example for this is we talked about this. Recently. I remember one of the shiurim that the pasuk says, "Marav tucha shetzafanta liriecha," that David HaMelech extols the greatness of Olam Haba, of Gan Eden, and he says, "Marav tucha," how great is the goodness that is hidden away in Gan Eden. Instead of saying how great is the goodness, why doesn't he describe the goodness a little? If he wants to get us excited about Gan Eden, about Olam Haba, instead of saying it is so amazing and so great, tell us what the greatness is. And imagine you want to entice your child to come to an amusement park, and you tell the child, it is so unbelievable, it is amazing, it is good. What's there? It is amazing, it is good, it is wonderful, stupendous, but what's there? Why doesn't he tell us what it's about? So the Rambam says, because he can't. Because there's no way for us to have any hasaga, any conception whatsoever about what's going on in Gan Eden, because nothing like it exists over here in this world. And the example that he gives is, imagine trying to explain to someone who's blind from birth, trying to explain to them the concept of colors. Oh, there's a blue and there's a red and there's a yellow. No, what's the difference between blue and yellow? The blind person asks you. Go try to explain. The person has no frame of reference whatsoever. You know, Hashem created us with 5 senses. Imagine if there was a 6th or a 7th or 8th sense. But we can't relate to that because we don't have it. So Hashem did us this kindness by creating us in His image. That we have this ability of as Eve says, from our own frame of reference, from our own perspective, from our own experience, we can have some sort of understanding of Hashem. So that's the first thing that the Alter Rebbe says, that our ability to be able to understand anything about Hashem's midas is because we have those midas. Why do we have those midas? Because we are achilek alikam yimal mamish. However, then the Alter Rebbe is going to continue and say, but hold your horses, don't get too excited. Don't think, okay, Hashem is chesed, I have chesed. Hashem is gvura, I have gvura. So good, so buddy. I can understand Hashem's chesed, I can understand Hashem's chachma or bina, because after all, it's the same thing. Here's where the Alter Rebbe is going to push back and say, not quite at all. And this is what we're holding. We started the conversation last week that the Alter Rebbe brings down the pasuk, which Avraham Avinu said, "Va'anochi afar ve'efer," I am but dust and ashes. And the Alter Rebbe asked the question, why is it? What's the idea of dust and ashes? Are those the only 2 items that are worthless that Avraham Avinu was able to think of? What's the significance of dust? What's the significance of ashes? And the Alter Rebbe now is going to tell us an idea that he heard from his Rebbe, from the Maggid of Mezrich, whose yahrzeit, along with the Geula of the Alter Rebbe, will be observing and commemorating and celebrating this upcoming Tuesday. And Rich Hashem later on in the lesson will talk a little more about that. And the Maggid explains why Avraham Avinu said, "V'anochi offer ve'efer." Let's do this inside. 4 lines from the bottom of page Kuf Chaf Aleph, which is opposite of page 240. However, we first need a preface. In other words, before we actually engage in the analysis of the Sfiras, first we have to give another Hagdama. That which I heard from my teacher, Olav Shalom, al pasuk v'anechi offer ve'efer, on the pasuk v'anechi offer ve'efer, I am but dust and ashes, sha'amar Avraham Avinu Olav Shalom, which Avraham Avinu said. So the first thing we have to understand is, when Avraham Avinu was said, anechi offer ve'efer, you might think, that what was he talking about? That he was talking about his guf? No. The Maggid tells us, the Maggid of Mezrich tells us that Avraham Avinu was talking al ha'aras nishmasei ha'me'ira begufa. Avraham Avinu wasn't talking about his guf. When he was saying, I am dust and ashes, he was talking about his neshama.
But neshama is a spiritual thing. Dust and ashes is a gashmish thing.
Exactly.
So what's one thing have to do with the other?
My guess is that we'll find out. Ha'me'ira begufa, the neshama which is meir in the body.
Enlightens.
Because you have to realize that not all of the neshama is meir in the body. Not all of the neshama illuminates and is processed within the body. There are parts of the neshama, the higher parts of the neshama, when in Kabbalah is called chaya and yechida, they're above and beyond the body. Meaning that the neshama isn't physical, so you can't confine the neshama spatially anyways. When we say that the neshama is in the body, what does that mean? That means that there's a spiritual force that animates and gives life to the body. It's not in the body. In other words, it's saying it's within the space, the 3D shape of your body that doesn't apply to something which is spiritual. Right. So that's why we have to have anthropomorphism. Understand that it's an anthropomorphism.
What does that mean?
That means that a lot of times we ascribe.
Like Shania had a T.
I want to hear.
Yeah.
Well, I want to hear a definition. What's the definition?
They're saying right. Anthropomorphism is ascribing physical features to a non-human entity. So yeah, everything we learn in the Torah, everything we have to always disassociate it from any physical connotation whatsoever, physical or spatial. So the neshama that gives life to your body, let me just finish explaining and then I'll take your question.
Yeah.
The neshama that gives life to your body, part of it enters your body and part of it doesn't. What does that mean? Part of it remains transcendent, isn't processed by your body. So for example, let's say I say something, I give a shir, and it's a very complicated, difficult, abstruse shir with many sophisticated and deep concepts. And let's say you didn't understand what I said. Ever happens, Ruve?
A lot of times.
All the time.
All the time, okay? So then you go home, and someone asks you, how was the shir today? And you say, that shir? It went over my head. Right? Would that be, went over me?
Yeah, it's a pretty accurate assessment.
Did the shir really go over your head?
No.
And the other shirim are in your head, and this one went over your head? What does that mean, went over your head?
Above his pay grade.
My shir can be contained in a certain space. So what does over your head mean? Over your head means that your mind, your brain wasn't able to process it. Although, by the way, the shir was in your head because you were there and you listened and you heard the words. But your brain wasn't able to process it. And the same thing is also, just like in the worlds, when we talk about some of the light of Hashem enters the world and some of the light of Hashem surrounds the world. We're not talking spatially because, again, Hashem isn't begeder makim. But it means that some of the light of Hashem enters the world on its terms and the world is able to process it and, so to say, grasp it. And some of the light remains totally above and beyond. And the same thing is in our neshama. There are certain koiches of our neshama, for example, the etzama neshama, the pintel yid. We know that your feelings are in your heart, right? Your koyach hariyah is in your eyes. Your seichel is in your brain. Where's your pintel yid? It isn't anywhere. It's above you. What does it mean it's above you? Of course, it's part of your neshama, but there's no part of it that your heart processes your emotions, your head processes ideas, your ears processes your neshama's koyach hashmiya, the capacity to hear. So that means that those koyches enter your body and are processed by the body. Now there's some things which remain above and beyond, which is why a person can go for 50 years without even feeling the pintali until one day someone wakes it up. Why can't you feel it? Can you imagine a person in 50 years without seichel? No, it's not shaykh, because the seichel is mislabish in you. It enters you. So the Alter Rebbe over here says that when Avram Avinu said Vanechi Ofer Ve'efer, he was talking about the neshama, but which part of the neshama? The part of the neshama that enters the body. Ha'aras nishmasai, the ray of the neshama, mi'ira begufay, which comes in the body. In other words, he wasn't referring to the essence of the neshama, but the neshama which enters the guf. Yes.
I'm saying that you mentioned before, like the neshama is within the body, part of the body. So I can't remember which sefer I read, like the nefesh, the neshama, the hasichli is in the brain, and then the nefesh bahami is in the heart. So, like,
okay.
Is it like literal, or if you said
it's not literal, because everything has to be understood. All these things have to be understood metaphorically. But what it's saying is that the nefesh hasichlis is mislabish in the brain. The brain actually is a keli for it. Those parts of the neshama that the body is a keli for it, so we consider it as if the neshama entered the body. The part that the body is not a keli for, so we call them makif. We call them
outside the body.
Right, surround, transcend, but it's not spatially. It's conceptually.
Also, my father, also the big rabbi, he also said, like, when someone doesn't understand anything, it's like what you said, it's always the Armakif.
There's a right.
Then he gets into the Arpanim, it just takes time.
Right. Sometimes the Armakif enters the Arpanimi, sometimes the Armakif is too high and never enters the Arpanimi. But yeah, that is correct. Avram Avinu's neshama, which he was referring to as Alpha Ve'efer, where did Avram Avinu's neshama come from? It came from Me'oyer Chesed Elyon, from the oir of Hashem's supernal chesed. That's we know that Avram Avinu, his neshama was a neshama which was derived from Hashem's chesed. Vihi, and what did that result in? Midasa, the midah of Avraham, midas ava rabam, the midah of tremendous ava. Sheba hoya, shehoya oihev, as HaKodesh Baruch Hu. Avram Avinu, his whole avodah was, his midah was tremendous love, which he loved Hashem, ahava gedola v'elyoina kolkach, with such an incredible and intense and high ava, ad shenasa merkava l'Kadosh Baruch Hu, to the point that he became merkava to Hashem. Merkava, we know that, as we'll talk about a little later today, the tachlis, the point of everything is we try to become nisbatel to Hashem. We want to have bittul.
Yeah.
And in bittul, however, there are different levels of bittul. In Chassidus, it talks about multiple levels in bittul. And perhaps the highest level of bittul that's discussed in Chassidus is the bittul of Merkava, or one of the highest levels, the bittul of Merkava. Once again, when we talk about in Yeshaya and Yecheskel, we read about a Merkava and a chariot. These aren't physical. There's no physical chariot and somewhere up high in the sky. These are all spiritual concepts. So why is it called a Merkava, a chariot, if it isn't a chariot? Once again, we have to look, what does a chariot represent? The bittul represents. And when we talk about the Merkava above, we're talking about malachim that are on that level of bittul, the bittul of Merkava. When you have a chariot and a chariot goes somewhere, and if you ask the chariot and say, hello, Mr. Chariot, today you took that person to the store. Is that what you wanted to do? Or maybe did you want to really relax? Or maybe you wanted, instead of going to the store, maybe you wanted to go to the baseball game. And the Merkava says, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have a ratzon. I don't have a will. I'm driven. Someone drives me. It's a very high level of bittul. The high level of bittul. It's obviously an unnatural level of bittul, which someone has to work for to achieve it, to arrive at, and most people will never arrive at that level of bittul. This was the madrega bittul of the Avis. They were like a chariot to Hashem. They had no ratzon. They were completely mevatel the ratzon to the point that Hashem was the reichiv. Hashem is the rider, like Hashem is the Adam, Sha'al HaKisei, the person riding the chariot, and the Avis were Sachako. They were a Merkava. That's how batal Avram Avinu was to Hashem. He was a Merkava, but a Merkava to the Midas HaChesed of Atzilus. So you can imagine how lofty his neshama was. V'sal kedai tachamina. So I would think, shebechinas Chesed v'Ava shalamayla b'sfiras el Yonis. I would think that the Chesed and the Ava of Hashem, the spheres in the world of Atzilus, Hi me'ein v'sug muhus midas ahava rabba shel Avram Avinu alav hashalom. I would think it's the same substance as the Ava of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu, his Ava was similar in quality. It was similar in quality to the Ava of Hashem, the Ava of the Midas HaChesed of Atzilus. Rak. I would think, 1 second. Avram Taka is down here in this world, and the Ava and Chesed of Atzilus is in the higher world. So obviously Hashem's Ava, the Ava of Atzilus, is higher than is higher. Rakshihi Gedoylov and Nefla Mimena Lamaila Maila in case of Tachlis. It's only that the Ava of Hashem, the Midas Ava of Hashem, is so much higher and so much loftier than, infinitely higher. Kenoida, as is known, Midas Al Yoina She'ein Lam Kates Sefer Tachlis Mishad Atzman. As we know that Hashem's Midas don't have any, are limitless, right? Hatoiv Ki Lechalu Rachamecha, we say that Hashem's Rachamim, it has no end, it has no limit. So the same thing is with all of Hashem's Midas. Ki Eire Seif Baruch Hu Meirum Lubash B'toicha Mamish. Because within the Midas of Atzilus, within the Midas of the Chesed and the Gevurah and Teferes, within all the Midas of Atzilus, you have the infinite light of Hashem. It is shining mamish within them. The Iu v'garmoy to the point that Hashem is absolutely one, not only with the Oiris of Atzilus, but even with the Kalim of Atzilus, which we're not going to explain right now what that means. Stay tuned for a future simon in the Iggeres HaKodesh. We'll learn about that. As opposed to the neshama of a person, even the neshama of Avram Avinu. At the end of the day, that neshama enters the body. She actually be the case of Gvul. So Avram Avinu, even though he had this incredible Ava, but ultimately it was
finite.
It was a finite. I would think. I would think that the Midas of Avram Avinu are similar to, of the same quality as the Midas. They're much lower, they're much less, but I would think that there's something similar. You can make a comparison. You can draw a comparison between them. Before we continue, understanding the intensity and the greatness of Avram Avinu's Ava, his Midas Ava. Here the Alter Rebbe focuses on his Avas Hashem, but it wasn't only his Avas Hashem. We know Avram Avinu exhibited his Ava in every which way. It expressed itself in his Havnasas Archim, for example, because that was his whole Inyan. His Inyan was Avas Hashem. A tremendous Ava. He was a merkava to the Chesed and Ava of Atzilus. And as a side note, that gives us a little deeper appreciation for the Nesayin HaKodesh. A while back, I was talking to someone, and this person was a frum person, a chassid, but a thinking person.
What?
A thinking person. And he told me, you should know that every single day in davening, when I say Vahi Achad Varme'ela, when I say the story of the Akedah, it bothers me. It bothers me. This notion of Hashem telling Avram Avinu to take his son and to shecht his son, such. How could Avram even have entertained such a thought? Avram Avinu. How could the Torah tell us a story of this sort? And Avram Avinu was celebrated as someone who was so great. How could a person be willing to do that? So I responded to this person. I said, "You're 100% right." And that's why it wasn't a sign. If Hashem would have told Avram Avinu, go shech your son, and Avram Avinu, oh sure, no problem. That wouldn't have been a Nisayim. This was the 10th of the Nisyanis, the hardest, most difficult of the Nisyanis. Why? Because as difficult as you think it would have and should have and could have and had to have been for Avram to do it, it actually was much, much more difficult. Why? Because Avram was the paradigm of chesed, the paradigm of love. You can only imagine the love that he had for Yitzchak. And you can only imagine the difficulty when Hashem told him this. Every single fiber of his being protested against us. It went against everything that he stood for. So you're pointing to a truth. In other words, had it been an easier thing, you'd have been fine with that. But then it wouldn't have been an Asoyin. The whole point was that Hashem wanted to say, I want you to do something which is the most difficult thing in the world for anyone in general and for you specifically. And Avram Avinu was ready to do that. And that shows Avram Avinu's bittul to Hashem. So the person who reads the story of the Akedah every day and doesn't get bothered by it is missing the point a little. Is missing the point. Person who thinks that Avram was a robot, and Hashem says, Shech your son, and Avram says, Hineni, no problem, okay, is missing the point, because then it's not an assign. And after the Akedah, when Avram says, and Hashem tells Avram, Ata yadati. Kirei Elokim Ata, there's a reason why. Because it was most difficult in the sign, and precisely because it was Avram Avinu.
It was against his nature, you're saying.
Right. All of the Nisyanis went against Avram Avinu's nature. Every single one of the Nisyanis.
But if he was listening carefully, the Eresh never told him to shut.
I understand.
Told him, bring him up, now
Okay.
take him down.
But
Eresh doesn't lie.
But Hashem orchestrated it that and He said it in a way that should make Avram Avinu
Right. But
believe that way.
I might have said, what do you want me to do after I take him? I may have been, I'm detail-oriented. I would have questioned the Eresh further.
Are you a lawyer?
No. Except in my house, not on the outside.
I hear it. All of the Nisyanis were things that went against Avram Avinu's nature. Because if it doesn't go against your nature, it's not an assign. The first Nisayan, Lech Lecha, right? It's also, if Avram Avinu was a Gevura person, an introvert, and Hashem says, okay, now I need you to go to Eretz Yisrael, he says, okay, no problem. But Avram Avinu was a Baal Chesed. He had developed relationships with everyone around him.
You have to abandon all
He
this.
has to abandon his family, his mishpacha, his friends, right? For a Baal Chesed, it's very difficult. All of the Nisyanis went against Avram Avinu's nature. But nothing compared to the Akedah.
Did delay. He said, which son? The one you love. I love both of them. So he did go on that path. He was trying to see.
No.
He knew the answer.
Look at the pasuk here. It's not what happened. So right? It says Kachna, as Bincha, Sichidcha, Sharahafta.
Right, but he
That's
loved both.
Yitzchak. 1 second. But he didn't yet tell him what he wants to do. When Avram Avinu argued and said, when Hashem said Kachna, as Bincha, and he said, which son? Avram didn't yet know what Hashem wants him to do with his son.
Oh, okay.
The words were Lech Lecha Alei Shemiriyev Alei Shem Lo Elo is next words in the pasuk. So it wasn't that he was arguing after Hashem told him what it was before that. But Al that's an aside.
Mm-hmm.
So weiter an aside.
It doesn't say that he asked him that anyway. Hashem was saying.
Hashem Hafto. And then he said, I love both. But
Rashi says it wasn't that
That's
way.
It doesn't-
That's
it-
Torah
it's
Shabbat.
not in. Yeah, that's
But he
not.
says Hashem Hafto.
That's not in the pasuk. So,
No, but it's obvious what he
Okay, let's return.
but he didn't ask him that.
Let's go
says
back.
Asher Hafto. You love
Well,
both.
that's Amar, and that's why Avram Avinu said, "Vanoichi offer ve'efer," to remove any question or any doubt or any thought that perhaps his neshama, which was a merkava, to midas hachesed and above, to remove the thought that maybe therefore we can make that comparison and draw a comparison and say they're somewhat similar to each other. Therefore, Avram Avinu says, "Vanoichi offer ve'efer." Why? Now, the Rebbe is going to go into a lengthy analysis of what exactly is Afer. What is Afer? What is ashes? Today we already know, scientifically, that nothing can be destroyed. Nothing can be destroyed. Matter can change form and matter can become energy. Energy can become matter. But nothing can actually be destroyed. So you have a big tree, you burn it, and now you have ashes. Where's the rest of the tree? What happened to it? You have this big tree, and now you have some ashes. So the Rebbe explains. Again, this is what he heard from his teacher, from the Maggid. The K'moisha Efer, just like the ashes. Humuhusei va'atzmusei shal ha'etzan nishaf. The ashes are the essence of the tree that was burnt. Shahoya Murkav Medalid Yesedis. The tree originally was comprised of the 4 elements: Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar. Fire, wind, water, and earth. Vigimel Yesedis Eish, Mayim, Ruach Chalfu v'holchu lahem. What happens is when something burns, what happens is the Eish, Mayim, and Ruach depart. Vikalu, and they are disintegrated, or they go away. Ba'ashan, in the smoke, hamishava mahar kavasan kenoida, the smoke which is made up of the way they were put together. V'yisoid hadalet shehoya be'etz, the fourth yisoid, which was in the wood, shehua offer sheboy hayerid lamata. That is, what is the fourth yisoid? The fourth element is the earth. The earth is the only element which goes downwards. Ve'ein ha'esh shelet as by, earth can't be burned. Hu ha'nishar kayim, that's what remains left. V'hu ha'efer, that is the ashes. So basically, a wood is comprised of eish, ruach, mayim, and afar. What happens when it burns is, in the fire and in the smoke, the eish, mayim, and ruach departed, leaving you only with the pure afar. That is what the ashes are. Kol mahusa'ei, it's the entire substance of the tree. Umma mashay, its tangibility. V'chumrei, it's material. V'tzurasai, and its shape. Ba'irach, v'reiche, v'oivi, in length, in width, and depth. Shehoya nira la'ayin, that which was visible to the eye. Koydem shenishraf, before it was burnt. Ikari hoya mi yisoida afar shabai. Think about it for a moment. The primary, in the tree, you have eish, ruach, mayim, and afar. But what is the primary element in the tree before it gets burnt? The primary element is the earth. That's right. That's what gives it shape, and that's what gives it substance. Rak only she'eish mayim ruach kelulim bay. It's only that the water, the fire, the water, and the wind are included in it. Because the afar, the earth, is more coarse, is more physical than all of them. It is only earth that has width, length, and depth. As opposed to fire and wind certainly do not have width and length and depth. It's also a certain thing that the water is only a small amount in the wood. And its whole length and breadth and width, or width and breadth, hakol hoya min ha'afar. Primarily it's constituted of earth. V'hakol shavel ha'afar. And even after you burn it, now what happens? It returns to earth. Shehu ha'efer, which is the ashes. Ha'nishar, which remains. After the water, the fire, the water, and the wind depart. So it turns out that the ashes really represent the bulk and the body of the wood. The bulk and the body of the wood still are here. Because if you think about it, before it got burnt, the wood was primarily constituted of earth, with only a little eish, mayim, and ruach in it. Now it got burnt, the eish, mayim, and ruach, which are, by the way, are the more spiritual elements, departed. And now we're left with the earth, which means that essentially we're left with the same thing that we had, because the tree was primarily earth in the first place. Just like you can't compare the ashes to the beautiful large tree, in length and width and breadth, before it was burnt. You can't compare the ashes to the tree, not in quantity, not in quality. Even though that the ashes is the substance of the tree, the essence of the tree. The same thing. That's what Avraham Avinu was saying. On his midah, the midah of chesed and ava, which shined in him and which was in his body. The av shehi midas ha'ava v'chesed elyon shabbat silus amer b'nishmasei. Even though it is the midah of ava and chesed of atzilus which was being made in his body. Remember we said earlier, vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim, right? And chelik alika, the neshama of Avraham Avinu is saying, the neshama that I have within me is literally the same substance as the midas hachesed and atzilus. Afal pikein, nevertheless. When the neshama comes down and enters the body, with the world chaining down through the worlds, one level after another level, through many contractions of the light, Ein dimin ve'erach muhus oir ha'av ha'meir bay. The comparison of the oir, of the light of Ava, which was in Avram Avinu, el muhus oir Ava v'chesed elyon shabatzilus, comparing it to the chesed of Atzilus, is Ella is only ke'erach v'dimyin muhus ha'afar shenase efer. It's the same thing like comparing the afar, the earth that became efer, that became ashes, el muhusei ve'echusei, to its substance, kshoya eitz nechmad lamara, when it was a tree, which was beautiful to perceive, v'teiv lamachal, and gave off tasty fruits al derech mashal. By way of example, the yoser mazeh, and even more than that, lahavdil ba'alafim havdalas. At the end of the day, the ashes and the tree they're somewhat comparable to each other. And Avram Avinu, the difference between his neshama and the chesed of Atzilus is separated by thousands of levels. It's only the Torah speaks in the language of the human being, b'mashal melitza, with a mashal, with mashalim and euphemisms. So this is very powerful. And it's a great example. Avram Avinu was saying that my neshama is like the offer that became Efer. Is like the earth that became ashes. The earth of the tree. Originally, what was the tree? The tree was comprised primarily of earth.
Yeah.
And now, and now you have ashes. But comparing my neshama to its source in Atzilus is like comparing ashes to a beautiful large tree. And even though you're going to say, it's the same thing, this is Afar and this is Afar, and you're primarily right, because at the end of the day, the ashes is Afar. And at the end of the day, the tree, what is the tree? It's 98% Afar also. It's a little Aish, a little Ruach, a little Maim, and those who went away. It's the same thing. It's the same thing, but it's not the same thing at all. So Avram Avinu was saying, although my neshama is a Merkava to Midas HaChesed of Atzilus, comparing my neshama to Midas HaChesed of Atzilus is like comparing ashes to wood. But this is very interesting, because on the one hand, this actually substantiates what we said earlier. At the end of the day, what is your neshama? Just like at the end of the day, what is the ashes? It is the offer that was in the tree. It's not something different. And that's why we are able to look at our neshama and have some sort of conception about Hashem. Why? Because this is chesed and this is chesed. This is afar and this is afar. But to make the mistake and to think, so because vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, because amachilik elakam mal mamish, because mebsari ech zalika, therefore there's some sort of comparison between me and the midas of Atzilus. That's silly. Even Avram Avinu, who was a Merkava, he realized that his neshama was like Afar compared, like Efer compared to Afar. And so that's what Dr. Rebbe is. This is the introduction Dr. Rebbe gives to the body of the Perek, and it really contextualizes and gives us. We're going to learn about the midas of Hashem. That's really what we're going to do. Beginning with the next section, we're going to start learning about the midas. Hashem's chesed, Hashem's gevurah, Hashem's teferes, and each time we're going to do it, we say, I know that, I understand that, I can relate to that, I have chesed also. And in a very, very, very infinitesimally tiny way, you're correct. Why? Because this is Afar and that's Afar. Like the ashes can compare itself to the tree. But as much as we're able to say, I get a little of it, because after all, it is a chilek alika, we still have to have the humility, and we have to understand that ultimately trying to compare ourselves to Hashem is like trying to compare ashes to earth. And as Dr. Rebbe says, even that is not a good comparison. Thousands of times more removed we are from our shayrish from above.
Is it like saying, comparing quality with quantity? The midas of HaKodesh Baruch Hu is infinite. That's quantity.
What's interesting?
But the midas of Avraham Avinu is just a finite. It's almost the same. I wouldn't say in the quality is great, but the quantity of it is not the same.
As we mentioned,
is that true?
I'm gonna answer. As we mentioned, Eish Ruach Maim and Afar. The Rambam speaks about this also in Hilchos Yisei Torah. There are levels in one. Each one is more physical than the one before it. Eish, fire, is the most spiritual of the elements. By the way, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Afar also correspond to the four worlds. Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah. And each one, Eish is even though is fire, would you say it's something which is spiritual? it's a something over here in this physical world, and that has physical properties. And if you go to a scientist, they'll probably describe for you the physical properties of fire. But at the same time, how much does fire weigh? What is fire's size? It's highly, highly intangible. So therefore, it is the most spiritual of the elements. But as spiritual as fire is, I'm sorry, and then you have a wind, air. Now air is actually more tangible than fire. Air does weigh. Air does have weight to it.
Yeah, specific weight.
Right? You're an engineer. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, 'cause in air you have different gases, and each gas has a different weight to it. And
Right, and if you ever feel-
that's
if you-
the godly. One sec, I'm talking. The godly Silberberg is that he makes it windy. There's a wind that it mixes all the gases. So, but if the gases were trapped in a confined area, then you would have like nitrogen would be a little heavier, and then you have more, some other carbon monoxide, whatever, they're more heavier than the others, so it's possible.
It's very simple. Try picking up a tire before you inflate it and after you inflate it, and you'll see that air weighs. Right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but
That's simple.
Yeah, but it's only when you contain it in something.
No, that means then it weighs more.
It's confined.
No, it's contained
No.
within something. That's why you can feel the weight.
That's why it's condensed. That's why you can feel it. But it weighs even otherwise. Just thing is, and when it's not condensed, it doesn't weigh
Yes,
enough to
you
be.
can't feel
There's a
it.
change. There's a change in
Yes,
weight.
you can't
If it's an
feel-
empty tire,
Okay.
that's a different weight.
I think we can move on. The concept is correct. Air does weigh,
Yeah.
and it's not as spiritual as fire is. Water is more physical
More
than the both of them. But then the water also, it's very, it's liquidy.
Liquidy, yeah.
Again, it doesn't have, it's not set, it's not,
Well, if you turn it to ice, it is.
if you turn it to ice, that is correct.
they call it heavy.
And the ultimate, the most physical of the Yesod is offer is earth. So what happened is when you burned the tree, what really happened is you sucked out, the fire sucked out the spiritual elements and left it behind only the most coarsest, basest, most chumriyistic element that remains. Now, and that the mashal is correct over here also. By the time the neshama comes down over here, it's almost like you sucked all the ruchnis out of it. And all that's left in the neshama, everything's relative. Obviously, the neshama is spiritual. Even the lowest level of the neshama is spiritual. But relative to the higher levels of the neshama, it's as if you sucked all the spirituality out of it and you're left with the oil of masiyah, which is the lowest level that there is. And when you suck out the spirituality of something, it has no resemblance to its previous form when it had the spirituality in it, just like the tree and the ashes. Yeah.
It said Adam lahevel dama. Doesn't say Adam laafar dama.
Why is a person called Adam? Remind me.
Adam lahevel
I know, but why is a person called Adam? Remind me.
כי נוצר מן האדמה.
Thank
It
you.
was created from
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what's interesting is, and we touched upon this last week already, is that Avram Avinu is saying Vanochi Afer Ve'efer, which now we understand is the ultimate declaration of humility. And we always knew that Vanochi Afer Ve'efer is Avram Avinu declaring his humility, but now we have a deeper understanding also on the meaning of what he said. And at the same time, Avram Avinu wasn't a meek person in any which way, shape, or form. And Avram Avinu, even at the time when he was saying these words of Anechi Afer Ve'efer, was engaged in an epic debate with Hashem, which itself doesn't really bespeak such great humility. But if you think in a larger sense, Avram Avinu personally affected the greatest revolution in the history of the world. And Avram Avinu was always called Avram Ivri, because the whole world was on one side. The whole world was on the Ever Echad on one side, and he was on the other side. And he went and he literally took on the entire world, and he won. He won. Look at the world today. Whether they got it right or whether they got it wrong. Besides the Yidden, Lahavdil also, the Christians and the Muslims, they all look at Avraham Avinu as the one who brought the monotheism into the world. And monotheism today is the prevailing religion, for sure, in the Western world. So, which is interesting. On the one hand, Avraham Avinu looked at himself as Vanechi Avar Ve'efer, but at the same time, he had this incredible toikef.
Energy.
How is that? How is someone who has such humility? How does he have such strength? Such strength to take on the world, and even we're here arguing on behalf of Islam V'Ameira, even Kaviyachol engaging with Hashem. But what we're learning over here really gives us some sort of understanding, a deeper understanding in what anava is, what humility is, and what humility isn't. Let's start with the simple. Humility isn't having an erroneous conception of self, a delusional conception of self. It isn't humility when you have qualities, when you have talents, when you have achievements, and you're unaware of them. And that's not something which is to be valued. That means you're just unaware. Or if you're either you're unaware or you're not being honest about your situation. And not being able to see things objectively and honestly is never a good thing.
Inferiority complex.
It's not about having
not an Ibis.
No.
It's
no.
not an
Having,
Ibis.
having no self-esteem.
It's also not about pretending, not to
That's for
knowing it. No, it's not about when you're speaking to other people pretending to be lowly. In the Hakdama to Tanya, in the preface, the Alter Rebbe, he writes. He after he explains what the purpose of Tanya is, he says, and if someone learns Tanya and they're not understanding what it's saying, or they're not seeing the answer to their question in Tanya, because Tanya was written as the answer to all the questions a person might have in Avodas Hashem. So he says, so let him go to the Gedolim Shebe'irei, the leaders in the city, V'heimi V'inanuhu, and they will let him. They will give him to understand what the Alter Rebbe is saying in Tanya and what the answers to his questions may be. V'aleim b'kashasi, and the Alter Rebbe says, and to them, the Gedolim in each city, I request of them, Shleilasum yad l'peh, don't cover your mouth with your hand. Lihisnaig ba'anova v'shiflus shal sheker chas v'shalom. Chas v'shalom, to act in a way of false anova and shiflus. U'koneida einish hamar, as is known, the bitter punishment, al minei bar, for someone who denies someone else Torah. If you have it and you say, I can't teach you, I'm too humble to teach you. That's something which is an awful thing. V'goydul aschar, and the reward for to the contrary for someone who does teach someone else Torah and does not. So, anova is not about a wrong assessment, a misassessment of oneself. Anova is not about faking one's own stance. So what is anova? So if I know who I am, and I know my talents, I know my strengths, I know my attainments, I know how much Torah I know how many mitzvahs I have done. So where does humility come from? So one answer that's given in different mamarim is that anova comes from the recognition that Hashem gave you certain talents. By the way, which is interesting, who was the most humble person there was? Moshe Rabbeinu. Who was the greatest person? Now Moshe Rabbeinu was certainly aware of his own greatness, but he was the Anav. When Korach came and challenged Moshe Rabbeinu, so you think, how does a truly humble person respond to that? You think that Moshe Rabbeinu should have gone to Hashem and said, Hashem, he's probably right. He's probably more suited for the job than I am. Isn't that how a humble person should respond?
No.
But Moshe Rabbeinu goes to Hashem and says, Al teifin al munchasam. Moshe is fired. This is the person who Torah testifies about him that he was the humblest person to ever live. And Moshe says, don't listen to them. And Moshe orchestrates and engineers, and next day they're all dead. Because Moshe knew that he was the leader. And Moshe knew that he was the only one who could be the leader. But Moshe Rabbeinu also knew that Hashem gave him incredible, enormous koiches, more so than anyone else. And Moshe Rabbeinu thought to himself, if Hashem would have given those, I should consider myself superior to another person. Had Hashem given that person the koiches that Hashem gave me, he would have been just as great as me. And you know what? Maybe he would have been greater. So his humility didn't come from misassessing himself. His humility came from the fact that he recognized that he can't take credit for his greatness. No one can take credit for their greatness. Anyone who's great in any which area, it's because of the chesed of Hashem, the koiches that Hashem gave a person. So therefore, the greater you are, actually, the more humble you are. The recognition, yeah, I'm so great, but I didn't create my brains. I didn't create my various talents. Hashem gave it to me. I'm thankful to Hashem. I don't look down at another person. The recognition that Hashem given someone else. My upbringing, my parents, Amram and Yechevet, right? Amram was the Gadol Adar. And if Hashem would have given another person those koiches, now Hashem would have revealed himself and spoken upon him to another person, he would have been the same, and maybe even better. So that's where humility comes from. And this is a very practical thing. And every single one of us in our own lives, in any which area, which our strengths are not reasons to be arrogant. They're reasons to be thankful to Hashem. That's all that is.
Isn't it true? The more you know that you don't know.
That's a different concept,
Which
which is more right. But there's a deeper concept, which is what you're saying is a little more related to that. Humility ultimately comes from understanding that relative to Hashem, I'm nothing. And I am constantly in the presence of Hashem, and that is the ultimate humility. What was Avraham Avinu saying? His humility was understanding that relative to the midas of Hashem, he is Efer.
Is that mevatel?
I'm going to explain that in a moment. And it's not, once again, that doesn't in any which way negate one's own talents, negate one's own accomplishments. But when you're standing in front of, when you realize, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid, that I'm in front of Hashem, and when you have that hakara, then how can you be arrogant? Relative to Hashem, you're nothing. The greatest muscle for this, we know, it's brought down. Chazal tell us, tzadikim doimin lebayram. And when you stand in the presence of a truly great tzaddik, you are overcome with an immense sense of humility. And what does that humility come from? Did you suddenly realize something about yourself you didn't know before? Did you suddenly, all those things that you valued about yourself, suddenly they're not true anymore? They are true. You're still who you are, and you still accomplished what you accomplished, and you still have your talents, and you still have your strengths. But when you're standing in front of a greatness which is infinitely greater than yourself, you just feel bottled. There's no way for you to feel in any way haughty or arrogant or prideful when you're in front of such greatness. From my experience, this is definitely something that I'll never forget, is going by the Rebbe, whether it was for dollars or Keshel Bracha, or even just when the Rebbe walks by you, and then when I'm standing there and the Rebbe's walking into davening, and the feeling of complete bittul that enveloped a person at that time, but that wasn't a bittul that, I know this is not a word, but that disempowered you. You didn't walk out afterwards from 7-7 and you're like, okay, so I'm nothing, so I can't accomplish anything, I can't do anything, what am I? No. It wasn't that way, because it wasn't about putting yourself down, it was about a bittul in front of something greater. And that's what Avraham Avinu was saying. In Avraham Avinu's greatest expression of bittul of Vanoichi Afar Ve'efer, I am but dust and ashes, what he was essentially saying is that why am I nothing? Because I am ashes compared to the Afar. That I am relative to my Makar V'Sherish. And Avraham Avinu constantly lived in the presence and in the awareness of his source. And Avraham Avinu realized that he is nothing. And that is the ultimate bittul. When a Yid has, again, that Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Samid, wherever he goes, he realizes that V'hini Hashem Nitzav Alav, Hashem is there. How can I be a Balgaiva when Hashem is right here and I'm nothing compared to Hashem? That's one side of the story. And then there's a fascinating Hayom Yom from Chav Beis Cheshvan, which is almost going to turn everything on its head that we learned today. Almost, but not exactly.
Who wrote this?
Hayom Yom is a calendar which the Rebbe compiled in the year 1943. And it's every single day of the year, for a full year. It starts on Yutas Kislev of 1943. actually 1942, and it goes through Yud Ches Kislev of the following year. Sorry?
That was the previous Rebbe, right?
So the previous Rebbe passed away in 1950. At that point, the Rebbe published it, but the Rebbe compiled it from the writings of his father-in-law. The writings and talks of his father-in-law. So it's compiled by the Rebbe. So, and many Chassidim to this day, and they will learn every day the Hayom Yom of that day, the thought being that there's a special connection between the idea and that day. So the Hayom Yom of Chav Beis Cheshvan, so this is again from the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he says one of the Torahs of the Mezritcher Magid, which is interesting, because the Mezritcher Magid that we just quoted before, and he was talking, and the Mezritcher Magid was talking about Avram's incredible humility. Why? Recognizing how lowly his own chesed was relative to the chesed of Atzilus. So here's one of the Torahs of the Mezritcher Magid, which the Alter Rebbe heard when he was in Mezrich the first time he was there. The first time the Alter Rebbe was in Mezrich was the end of the summer of Tovkuf Chav Daled, and he stayed till after Pesach Tovkuf Chav Hey. So that would be 1764 through 1765. So that was the first time the Alter Rebbe was in Mezrich, and the first time the Alter Rebbe was in Mezrich, he heard the following Torah from the Magid. The pasuk says, "Anoichi asisi aretz va'adam aleha barasi." So the pasuk in Yeshayahu, where Hashem says, "I created the earth. I made the earth, and I created upon it the human being, the Adam." Anoichi misha anoichi. Anoichi is more than ani, more than ani. Anoichi, I am who I am. In other words, the I who is hidden from even the highest emanations. And Hashem, he dressed himself in many different contractions, and he emanated different emanations, and he created creations, and he created malachim, srafim, chayis, efanim, malachim, and an infinite amount of worlds. And then, with contractions, an unlimited amount of contractions, Asisi Aretz, Hashem says, I finally made the earth, the physical earth. Va'adam Allaha barasi, and I created and put man on earth. Because man is the tachlis ha'yisavos, the human being, is the purpose of all of creation. And the word barasi, Adam Allaha barasi, Adam, the human being, is the purpose of everything, and the word barasi is begematria taryag, 613, because that is the purpose of the human being. So Adam Allaha barasi, anoichi asisi aretz, I created everything. And the purpose of everything is Adam, is the person. And the purpose of the person is Barasi, which is the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. And as the Pardes says in the name of the Sefer HaBoyer, Sefer HaBoyer, I believe, was written by Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana. And the Pardes was written by Rabbi Moshe Cardavero, quotes the Sefer HaBoyer. The Midas HaChesed, said to Hashem, Ribono Shel Olam, ever since Avram Avinu was in the earth, I have not needed to do anything, because Avram is standing and he is doing everything in my stead. That was the complaint. That Midas HaChesed, the Chesed of Asilus, came and to complain to Hashem and said, ever since there's Avram in this world, I'm out of business, because Avram is doing everything in my stead. Because Avram, who is an Neshama Beguf and involved in Achnasas Archim and spreading the knowledge about Hashem in this world, in our world, is higher in level than Midas HaChesed of Atzilus. And when Midas HaChesed of Atzilus comes and tells that to Hashem, that is the jealousy of Midas HaChesed of Atzilus, which was jealous in the Avodah of Avram Avinu. This is what the Pardes quotes from the Sefer HaBoyer. This is one of the Torahs that the Alter Rebbe heard from the Magid. Talk about a reversal of fortunes. Over here in our Perek in Tanya, we're talking over here that Avram Avinu is coming and saying, "Vanechi Ofer ve'Efer," that compared to Midas HaChesed of Atzilus, he is like Ofer, like Efer compared to Ofer. And now suddenly we're finding out the other side of the story, which is the Chesed of Atzilus is jealous of Avram Avinu and coming and telling Hashem that ever since Avram is here in this world, I have nothing what to do. I'm out of business. Why? Because Avram and Hashem Beguf here in this world is L'mayla b'maylo madrega, is higher in level than Chesed of Atzilus. And both are true. They both come from the same person, from the same Magid of Mezrich, and they're both true. On the one hand, Avram Avinu is so much lower. The Neshama of Avram is so much lower than Chesed Atzilus. Afer ve'efer.
But on the other
But
hand,
Nesava HaKodesh Baruch Hu liyis leidir b'tachtoinen. Hashem wasn't interested in Chesed Atzilus. The reason why Hashem created everything is because Hashem wanted Olam Haza Hagashmi. Hashem wanted our world.
why is that?
And that's why Avram Avinu, even though it was so much lower than Chesed Atzilus, ultimately Chesed Atzilus is jealous of Avram Avinu because Dafka Avram Avinu is able to have an impact here in this world. Why is that? Why is Avram Avinu greater than Chesed Atzilus? Why is Olam Haza greater? And what does that have to do with Yud HaSkislev? I thought we would talk about it this week, but I guess we're going to delay that Mir Hashem for next week.